When the news of the disappearance of the film crew came from Brno in March of the year 1966, Moscow did not pay much attention to it at first. Such expeditions were repeatedly delayed in the Altai mountains. Unpredictable weather, lack of communication, primitive road conditions. Especially since it was not a scientific mission, but the shooting of an ethnographic film about the Old Believers, another project of the Culture Studio, supervised by the Ministry of Education. However, everything changed a week later when the local department of the Ministry of Internal Affairs received a telegram from the group's guide, a resident of the village of Yazovo, a certain Vasily Gordievich Mezentsev. He reported that the filmmakers had disappeared. No trace, no signal, no sign of their return. All that remained were the reels of film, found in a tarpaulin case among the rocks on an empty plateau near the Devil's Pillar tract. The camera was intact. Most of the frames were ruined, overexposed, as if subjected to flash or strong light influence. But one fragment survived. No sound. Uneven image, as if the cameraman was holding the lens unskillfully. 10 seconds, blurred outlines of the rocks. Then, a sharp turn. It was as if the camera had accidentally captured someone's figure. A man in black, standing in the middle of the plateau. The face is indistinguishable. He stands motionless. In the next instant, he disappears. Doesn't leave. Not running away. He disappears. Hence began a story that was not reported in the newspapers. A story that was never officially announced. A story that remained in the archives under the heading "Not Subject to Publicity." A story that was later distorted in rumors, in half-truths, in fears. But the documents have survived, and they speak clearer than words. The film crew consisted of 6 people. All were full-time employees of the film studio. Director Igor Pavlovich Yakubovich, cameraman Sergei Vikentayevich Rozhnov, sound technician Elena Arkadyevna Timoshina, technical assistant Alexei Piroshkov, administrative coordinator Lev Efimovich Baranov, and student trainee Alexander Vadimovich Slepsov. They were to spend about 2 weeks in the Khatun Ridge area. The area was known for its inaccessible places, sharp drops in altitude, unpredictable climate, and the presence of isolated settlements of Old Believers who agreed to participate in the filming after long negotiations. The route was carefully drawn up. The departure from Brno was on the 16th of February, a bus to Bisk, then a Gaz 69 to Yazovo. From there, 2 days on foot with a guide. The participants were provided with warm clothes, provisions, petrol for a generator, tents, a medical suitcase, and 2 Convas automatic cameras. The recordings were to be made on Shate 35 type film, standard for documentary work. The equipment weighed a lot, but the group was experienced. It was not the first trip for all the participants, except for Slepsov, but he was a tough guy, physically fit. According to the diary found among the things in the rucksack, the group reached the tract of Devil's Pillar on the 21st of February. The last entry was made the next morning. Woke up to a rumbling sound, as if a rock was falling into the abyss. The weather is clear. We are shooting a scene at the shrine. Vasily says that Old Believers don't go here. Strange place, very open, and the wind is somehow unnatural. The handwriting is neat. Yakubovich's handwriting. The rest is blank. 2 days later, Vasily Mezentsev, the guide, went down to Yazovo alone. He refused to talk to his neighbors and went straight to the village council. His face was pale, his eyes sunken. He didn't shout, didn't call for help, just said, "They've disappeared, like a fog. I woke up, no tent, no people, just a kofer with equipment and no trace of them." He was sent to Bisk, and there he was questioned by officers of the local KGB department. The record of the protocol has been preserved. There were no signs of struggle, no blood, no footprints, as if everything had disappeared in a second. The dogs didn't pick up the trail. One kofer was lying in a crevice as if it had been placed carefully. I didn't open the camera, didn't touch it. Got back as far as I could. Police officers and an army detachment, accompanied by 2 geologists, arrived at the site on the 28th of February. They expected to find bodies, or at least debris. Instead, they found only what had already been described. There was a strange silence on the plateau. No birds flew. There was no sign of fox or hare tracks. The soil was as if untouched. The wind blew in sharp gusts, kicking up dust but leaving no whirlwinds. The plateau was surrounded by vertical walls, weathered and cracked, as if time itself had died here. The tarpaulin case contained 1 intact camera and 5 reels. 4 were completely ruined. The 5th contained a short fragment, which was later written about in a classified memo for internal use. Its viewing caused alarm among all the members of the commission. The quality of the film made it possible to determine that the moment was not staged. The cameraman was probably shooting out of habit or by accident. But the disappearance of the figure, especially his character, seemed technically inexplicable. Neither montage, nor double exposure, nor tape defect. Nothing explained what was happening. The camera was taken to Moscow. In the Gosfilmophon laboratory, specialists confirmed that there had been no manipulation. The tape is authentic. The data coincide with the factory numbers of the film, issued to the studio Kultura. Sound experts tried to extract the background, but the phonogram was silent. No sound of wind, no footsteps. Emptiness. An internal memo was written about the incident and addressed to the cinematography department of the Council of Ministers. The document contained a recommendation. In order to prevent panic rumors, the group should be considered dead as a result of an accident. The materials should be destroyed. The place should be withdrawn from tourist routes. Vasily Mazentsev disappeared 3 weeks later. He went out hunting and did not return. His rifle was found near the rocky ledge where the plateau ends. There were no signs of a fall. That could have been the end of it. But a few months later, a letter arrived in the editorial office of Soviet Screen magazine from a woman who introduced herself as Maria Nikolaevna Selivanova. She wrote that her brother, Lev Baranov, who was part of the same film crew, allegedly sent her before the departure of the photo of an unknown male silhouette with the caption, "Met him at the shrine. He didn't speak, but we understood everything." The editors did not reply. The letter was kept in the archive. Later, it was confiscated by the officers of the P department. The spring of 1966 in Moscow was prolonged and snowy. It seemed that nature itself was stalling, not letting the ground thaw after what had happened in the Altai territory. But there was no official talk about it. Metropolitan officials were preoccupied with something else. The internal investigation of the film industry passed into the hands of a subgroup of the technical department of the State Cinema Committee, which included people who were not prone to speculation. Among them was Mikhail Ilyich Dorofeyev, deputy head of the Expedition Safety Department. He was a strict man who had served in the pre-war intelligence service. At his insistence, a second group was formed, unofficial, with the task of checking everything on the spot again. They were to go incognito, without publicizing their connection with the studio. Under the guise of employees of the regional archive, the composition of the group was diverse. Archivist, historian Anatoly Averyanov, geologist Valentin Chekhov, radio operator of the former communications unit Semyon Rachkov, and biophysical laboratory technician Galina Kapustina. All of them were sent to Yazovo, where their independent work was to begin. On the 24th of March, exactly 1 month after the disappearance of the filmmakers, the group arrived in the village. Yazovo greeted them in the same way as in the previous report. Dead streets, windy silence, suspicious looks from the locals. Here they knew. Here they felt that something unnatural had happened. The locals didn't talk idly. Even the wine did not loosen their tongues. They drank in silence. Old men crossed themselves at the word pillar, and no one wanted to be a guide. Only one person agreed. Pyotr Alexeyevich Shchedrov, a former teacher who had drunk himself and lived alone in a remote area. He said more than once that there are not spirits there, but something else that a man is not supposed to know. But he went for a bottle of moonshine and a can of condensed milk. Peter laughed hoarsely and said that something strange had been going on in the mountains for a long time, but no one believes it until they hear the ground beneath you breathing. These words were not heard at that time. And for nothing, the group traveled on foot. They brought with them tents, measuring equipment, a compass, geological tools, a handheld radio transmitter R105, one portable camera, and a photographic device fed too. The main goal is not to look for people, but to find out what could have caused the disappearance. From the cold this time suffered less. Early spring, the wind no longer penetrated the bones. But the further they climbed, the more pressure they felt. Not physical, atmospheric, no. It was psychological. It was as if an uneasiness was awakening in everyone's mind. Unreasonable, sticky. Even Semyon, who had traveled through Karelia and the exclusion zone in the post-war years, had his hands shaking when installing the antenna. On the third day of the journey, Pyotr Shchedrov suddenly disappeared. No shouting, no noise. He had simply gone out in the morning to fetch water and had not returned. His footprints led to a cliff where a fragile pine tree swayed over the slope, but they found neither a body nor signs of a fall. Only his flask remained, carefully placed on a rock. This threw the group off balance, but it was longer to go backwards than forwards, so they decided to continue on their way. On the 27th of March, they reached the tract of Devil's Pillar. The place really lived up to its name. It was a smooth, rocky plateau surrounded by natural rock walls. At the top was a ledge, like a huge fang sticking up into the sky. They called it the Pillar. The air here was dry, pungent, almost odorless. No birds, no insects. Only the wind whistled through the stone teeth like a moan. Initial measurements were inconclusive. No magnetic field abnormalities. The radiation background was within normal limits. But on the night of the 28th of March, Chekhov reported that he heard sounds, as if the pounding of footsteps on the rocks. A double-beat rhythm, as if someone was walking barefoot. He didn't believe himself, went out with a lantern. Stones. Silence. But in his diary he wrote, "Those sounds were closer than I would have guessed, and not an animal, that's for sure. Too measured, too human." That same morning, Rachkov noticed that the communication device was warming up, even though it was switched off. He took off the cover. Inside was a charred coil. The device was new. It had been delivered from a warehouse in Tomsk. No signs of factory defect. Later, it turned out that the second antenna, a spare one, gave a strong lead when switched on. This meant only one thing. Either there was a strong electromagnetic radiation in the area, or someone had influenced from the outside. But by whom? How? These questions remained unanswered. Meanwhile, Galina Kapustina was collecting soil samples. In one of the pockets of the rock ledge, she found charred bones. They were not human. By their shape and size, they probably belonged to a goat or small cattle. But the degree of charring was unnatural. It was as if the meat had been vaporized rather than burned. The fibers were gray, brittle, with a distinctive ozone smell. And yet, there was no sign of fire at all. Later in the camp, there was a conflict between the participants. Averyanov insisted on returning. Galina insisted on continuing the research. Chekhov on the attempt to climb the pillar. Arguments sounded sharp, even rude. They were shouting. But suddenly, everything was cut short. All four fell silent at the same time, because they heard a sound at the edge of their hearing. Not a howl, not a roar, but a hum, like a generator running at full blast, only from beneath the ground. It didn't last more than a minute. Then it was gone. None of the participants moved. Their faces were pale, their eyes like animals that had caught the scent of a predator. The next morning, Averyanov did not wake up. His body was intact, lying there as if he had fallen asleep, face calm, no pulse. Galina took notes. The skin is warm, but the cold is rapidly increasing. Pupils dilated. Cause of death is unclear. No convulsions, no foam. Just stopping. There was no connection. Rachkov tried to switch on the transmitter. The device burnt out on startup. Chekhov tore out pages from Averyanov's diary and burned them. He said that he had dreamt it in advance. They decided to leave. Immediately. They set up camp. But on their descent, they came across something that destroyed their faith in reality. Someone left an inscription on a steep cliff. In Cyrillic, clear, smooth, no paint, as if scratched with a sharp object. The inscription reads, "Do not enter where silence is heard." They took a picture of that sign. The film was intact. It was added to the internal file. After returning from the expedition, all the members of the second group were interviewed separately. They all started having trouble sleeping, hallucinations, memory disturbances. A month later, Chekhov disappeared in the Kaluga region, did not return from rounds at work. Galina went to Tyumen, where she was soon hospitalized with an acute mental disorder. There was only one left, Semyon Rachkov. He lived 2 more years, then he died of a heart attack, leaving a note. "We're not alone out there, but they're not people." As of mid-April of the 66th year, the case against the film group was formally closed. The entry in the internal control log, number 43, read, "The outcome of the case has not been established. Losses have been incurred, but the composition has not been identified." It was a form, a bureaucratic shield against questions no one wanted to answer. Meanwhile, a closed report sent to the KGB main directorate for Siberia contained another instruction. Consider the site unsafe. Contact with the local population should be limited. The alienation of the territory is temporary until an expert opinion is obtained. However, it proved impossible to archive the case. Soon, anomalous messages from independent observers began. The first was a telegram from Barnaul from the head of the geological party, Pyotr Gnatovich Schwarzov. He reported spontaneous failures of compasses, field seismometers, and overheating of magnetic exploration equipment on the border of the Kosh-Agach district. Below was a line. "The effect is intermittent. It is aggravated at night. The sound is muffled, as if a stone is rolling inside a rock." The second was a report by civil aviation pilot Mikhail Brajnikov. While flying the Semipalatinsk, Gorno-Altaisk route, his crew observed an unusual glow over a mountain range. The height is more than 3,000 meters. The color was dark blue, like deaf phosphorus. Time of observation, 5 minutes. The equipment detected a deviation in the altimeter. After landing, the aircraft was found to be technically serviceable. The pilot wrote in his report, "It can't happen, and yet it did." The staff of the department decided to involve the Institute of Geophysics of the Siberian branch of the USSR Academy of Sciences. In summer, the third, already semi-scientific expedition traveled to the region. Officially, it was to study tectonic activity in the Altai region. Unofficially, search for the source of anomalies recorded in the Stolby Tract. The group was led by Professor Evgeny Pavlovich Nurdinov, a specialist in deep seismics and a long-time opponent of theories about geoacoustic traps causing mass psychosis. It was he who insisted on the use of depth magnetometers and geoacoustic sensors of the Soviet model GAES-2. The expedition was based 100 kilometers from Yazovo. Everything about the vanishing point was carefully concealed. It consisted of a geologist, Boris Anatolievich Leonov, and a young experimental physicist, Inna Shalskaya, who had previously worked in institutes near Novosibirsk. Shalskaya kept a closed field diary. It was later removed, but one copy, according to unconfirmed reports, remained in her family's archive. From her notes, on the third day at the base of the ridge, the device gave an unauthorized discharge. At first, we thought it was a thunderstorm, but the sky was clear. 15 minutes later, we heard a characteristic low-frequency hum on the southwestern ridge. The noise did not resonate. No animals reacted. This was wrong. The hum was there, but it didn't touch matter. She went on to mention that Leonov claimed his right arm trembled every time they approached the stone plateau. At first, it was regarded as the result of an old trauma, but when taking the electrical activity of the skin, the experimental device was with him, recorded unusual bursts of alpha rhythms. Such readings are possible only in deep trance or fear. On the 5th day, they reached the pillar. The view from the summit was dead. Gray slopes, dried-up spruces, mosses, black rock, as if charred from the heat. Leonov was the first to notice that there were no mosses on the rocks here, even in the shade, where by all botanical parameters they should be. There were no living microorganisms in the soil. Sterility. This word was uttered for the first time. Shalskaya wrote, "It felt as if someone had scraped off the top layer of reality." The next night, something happened that was later expunged from all reports. A geoacoustic sensor went off. A pulse, 14 seconds long. Impossible. That's the kind of signal only seen in underground explosions. But the soil analyses show no trace of seismic activity. The strangest thing is that there was movement on the surveillance film. The camera began to rotate. The mechanism was mechanical. It couldn't be. It turned and froze, capturing the figure. It was a man. A human figure, clear, dark, standing right in the middle of the plateau, with his back to the camera. No movement, but after 3 seconds, the image leaked. Interference, contrast breakdown. When the film was played again, the figure disappeared, just as silently as it had appeared. Professor Nurdanov refused to accept this as fact. He attributed it to optical distortion, but the very next day he ordered the camp to shut down. The official explanation was technical difficulties. Unofficially, there was fear in his voice. When he returned, he resigned and never appeared in the scientific community again. Inna Shalskaya disappeared the same year. The official version is that she drowned during an expedition to Baikal. Her body was never found. The family claimed that before the trip she burned all documents and manuscripts. Only a part of the diary survived, passed on through an old colleague. It contains the last entry. "They're not alive, but they're not dead either. There's something in between, and it doesn't go away. It's waiting." After that, the pillar area was officially declared non-preferred for scientific work. Access was restricted. The papers said, "Threat of avalanche danger, unstable relief." But not a single avalanche was recorded. On the back of the map, preserved in the MSU archive, an inscription was made in pencil. "Do not touch. Zone of silence. The limits of emptiness." The middle of August of the 66th year. At Tashtagol station in the railway depot, a man in civilian clothes got off the train number 19. According to the documents, he was an inspector from the Ministry of Education, and his name was Alexei Arkadyevich Rundin. In reality, he was an employee of Subdivision A of the main archive department of the USSR Ministry of Internal Affairs, specializing in checking disappeared scientific groups. He was sent on the orders of the second department after an anonymous letter, signed with the initials GEK, was received at the Lubyanka. The letter read as follows: "The group did not die from the cold or the beast. What happened is beyond human comprehension. One survived, but he is silent. He's in the village of Karachibit with an old miller. Come here. He will confirm everything." The next day, Rundin reached Karachibit, a tiny dying village on the edge of the taiga. In the house of the miller, citizen Ignat Fomich, lived someone with amnesia. He was a man in his 30s, in a tepluka with severe burns on his hands. No documents, can't speak, just stares at one point. The nurse at the paramedic station said, "Eyes like a hunted animal. He sleeps with his eyes open." When Rundin asked about the date when he appeared, the locals named the day, the 4th of April, exactly 6 days after the alleged disappearance of the film crew. It was decided to send the man to Tomsk Psychoneurological Hospital. The medical certificate read, behavior is inappropriate. Psychosomatic reactions are unstable. At the mention of the word camera, acute stupor. At demonstration of film, shivering and vomiting. Speech is partially blocked, but he uttered 2 words, stop and stay away. Meanwhile, in Novosibirsk, in the archive of the Regional Department of Culture, a box of documents relating to the film project The Road to the East was discovered. There were the names of the entire group: Semenova, Kapralova, cameraman Silyutin, sound recordist Aganov, and production designer Chalomi. The most interesting thing, the application for the film was attached to the route approved by the Regional Department of Culture. There was one strange mark on the scheme, an area without a name, simply marked with an ink stamp, transition point. None of the archive staff knew where this stamp came from or who put it there. Rundin contacted Grigory Shtakev, a technician in the archive department. He remembered that the day before the film group disappeared, he had personally received the last batch of film from Silyutin for inspection. The film was spoilt. It had been exposed, with torn fragments, but one section was clear. He saved it for a technical demonstration. It was 41 seconds long. Shtakev switched on the projector. In a dark room, on a white wall, gloomy black and white images played. A rocky slope, the cameraman walking, the wind could be heard. Then the camera suddenly jerks, as if someone is ripping it out of his hands. It spins round, and a figure enters the frame. A human figure, standing on a plateau, clear, black, motionless. After a few seconds, there's a shudder, the image disintegrates, then darkness. The projector was switched off. Rundin sat in silence. Shtakev said, "I didn't show it to anyone else. I saw it once, and that was all. The dream went away afterwards. That silhouette is not a human being. There's something wrong with him. The proportions, they don't seem right. The legs are long, like sticks, and the shadow is at the wrong angle." The following week, Rundin traveled to the Pillar Plateau. He had not notified the local administration. He was with a guide, a former geologist, Pavel Krasheninnikov, who had participated in mapping the area in the 30s. For 2 days, they walked along ravines and kuroms. They spent the night on the slope of the pass. On the 3rd day, close to evening, they reached the summit. Krasheninnikov described what they saw in his letter to his wife. "This place has no odor. You see, not at all. No earth, no pine needles, no moisture, nothing. It's like we're not standing in the Altai, but in a corridor between worlds. No birds. The silence is absolute. I could feel the blood pounding in my ear. That's the only sound. The rest is as if cut out." Rundin began his inspection. There are scratches on the stones, not from boots, not from animals. Geometric, even, parallel. The footprints went in a circle, like someone was out there, circling. Then he found a black fragment of celluloid, the rest of the film, burns all over it. In the light, it had a strange sheen to it, as if from moisture, but it was dry to the touch. On the way back, Rundin felt ill. Headache, nosebleed, weakness. Krasheninnikov said that he turned blue in the lips and his teeth began to knock as if in the cold. They reached the village already at night. The local paramedic diagnosed him with acute hypoxia, cardiac arrhythmia, neurovegetative syndrome. 2 weeks later, Alexei Arkadievich Rundin died in hospital. On his body at the autopsy found traces of radiation burns. The case was closed again. The documents were sealed and sent to the archive for special storage. However, the story did not stop. In October, a letter arrived in Moscow, handwritten, in ink, in neat handwriting. "I was there. I heard them disappear. The camera doesn't lie. What's out there defies reason, but it's real, and it stays. Don't come any closer." Specific traces of the disappearance remained unclear, but a general picture was beginning to emerge. People in contact with this place were not coming back the same. Equipment was failing. Nature wasn't obeying biological laws. And most importantly, with every attempt to get there, the consequences became more and more apparent. Now there was no doubt. In the Altai Mountains, at an altitude of more than 2,000 meters, there was something against which the Soviet science of the middle of the 20th century had no answer. Autumn of the same year. October was waning. The sky over the Altai Mountains was poured with heavy gray lead. A new group arrived in the village of Ust-Koksa. Officially, a scientific expedition from the Academy of Sciences of the USSR. Unofficially, a working group of Research Institute number 467 at the Ministry of Defense, specializing in the study of anomalous geological zones. There were 6 members. The mission was headed by Viktor Arsenyevich Koltsov, Doctor of Geological and Mineralogical Sciences, a former member of the expedition to the Ukok Plateau in 56th, where they recorded a sharp drop in pressure and the disappearance of magnetic arrows. The main task of Koltsov's group was to check the Stolb Plateau area in light of the disappearance of the film expedition and the deaths of subsequent participants, including Rundin. Formally, they had not been given all the details, only the probable geomagnetic anomaly disrupting radio equipment. In reality, they were already under the tacit control of the KGB's second department. All participants signed a non-disclosure document. They reached the zone by the evening of the 16th of October. The rain had stopped. The sun was slipping towards the horizon. There was no wind. The air, as before a thunderstorm, dense, ringing. One of the group members, seismological technician Valery Pestunov, left an entry in his diary, which would later be confiscated by the investigators. The wind has stopped. Everything's still. We set up camp, but inside it felt like someone was looking at us. The dogs don't bark. The compass shows north in 2 different directions. I walk with a lantern. The light seems to go out a meter away. No one speaks. Everyone's hands are shaking. Only Koltsov is calm. It's as if he knew this would happen. That night, one of the group's members, meteorological technician Martinov, disappeared. The tent was unzipped. There were no traces. Nearby, they found his thermometer and notebook. The last entry. Time, 2 hours and 24 minutes. Air temperature, 0 degrees. Underneath that, in pencil, handwritten, "He's standing behind me." After Martinov's disappearance, the group decided to leave the zone urgently. But the way back took longer than usual. The map did not match the terrain. One of the participants, hydrologist Sashin, swore that they were going in a circle, but the compass doesn't show it. 3 days later, they were picked up by a helicopter. In testimony, the members of the group were a bit verbal, nervous. The medical commission found all of them showing signs of radiation background above the norm. One, Sashin, fell into psychosis and was later declared unfit for further service. He kept repeating, "He's standing, he's waiting, he's watching, he's not moving." The film found in the plateau was taken to Moscow, to a laboratory at the Kurchatov Institute. According to the results of spectral analysis, strong irradiation exceeding the safe level 10 times. The structure of celluloid is altered, showing zones that are not fixed in the usual way, possibly exposure to an unknown type of energy. Specialists of the optical photon department detected strange pulses when the fragment was scrolling in the infrared range. The report stated a rhythmic pulsing signal is observed, not from light, possibly a modulated magnetic field imprint. At this stage, another structure came into play, the T department, which reported directly to the 5th Directorate. These officers had already worked on similar cases, in particular on the strange death of geologists on the Kodar Ridge in 57 and the disappearance of a group of astronomers in Tuva in 62nd. All the cases had one thing in common: sudden equipment failures, disturbances in the perception of space, complete silence of witnesses, and the subsequent ban on publication. Meanwhile, strange things started to happen again in Altai. Local hunters, traders, and a few shepherds began complaining to the district committees about dead zones, where animals were disappearing, the radio was out of range, and the air was becoming thick as water. One shepherd, Ivan Denisovich Kravtsov, recounted finding his horse dead, with a scorched streak down its back. He also showed a strange indentation in the ground, a 3-meter circle where no grass grew and rocks were melted. The authorities sent a forester and a policeman, but they found nothing, although the forester later had an attack of hypertension and the policeman had a strange allergy to light. There was panic in the Kosh-Agach district. Several families left their homes. The district newspaper Znamia Truda tried to calm the population by publishing an article entitled "Rumors Have No Ground, There Is No Radiation." But by that time, 3 people had already gone to hospital with signs of radiation sickness. Koltsov, back in Moscow, continued to insist the zone was active. He submitted a classified memo to the Deputy Minister of Defense, suggesting that access to the plateau should be immediately restricted, the perimeter documented, and monitoring stations installed. He was ignored. In December, he was found dead in his flat, presumed to be a heart attack. However, forensic examination indicated the presence of rare burns on the inner tissues of his eyes and palate. The doctor who performed the autopsy, in an off-the-record conversation, described it as like he was looking directly into a nuclear flash. No trace of the disappeared filmmakers was ever found. No bones, no clothes, only the remnants of a rucksack with a faded tag where you could barely distinguish the surname, Silyutin. Another interesting thing was that the camera he was working with was designed to shoot at temperatures of at least -10 degrees centigrade, and the case was intact, no damage. Inside, snippets of the same film already viewed in Moscow, but one frame was added. It wasn't there before. It's a short, sharp moment, just 3 seconds. It's as if the camera rises and there's a pupil flash against the rocks, like an eye, too symmetrical, too alive. After that, noise, the end of the tape. No one else in the lab was willing to review the material. At this stage, the Ministry of Defense gave an order to stop field research in the area of the Stolb Plateau. The area was declared closed and marked on maps as a geologically unstable zone. Passage was restricted, documents were partially declassified, but rumors persisted. It was said that the following spring 2 students tried to get there and did not return. Their names were not preserved. Only the minutes of interrogation of the guardians of the reserve, where it was written, "They saw how they entered, they did not come back out." The story grew like a snowball. Witnesses were either silenced or disappeared. The materials were adding up in a single, disturbing chain. The camera that captured the silhouette existed. The area where people were disappearing, it existed. And with each passing year, it became clearer and clearer. In the pictures, in the records, in those who stepped there. February 1967. Archival footage of a teletype from Krasnoyarsk shows a report of a man in a serious condition, without documents, being admitted to the local psychoneurological dispensary. A man of about 35 years old, in worn-out clothes with severe hypothermia, traces of frostbite of both hands and left foot, didn't speak, didn't resist. He was afraid of electric light. He hid from it under the bed, reacted only to darkness. The doctors recorded depressed catatonic state. 3 days later, during a power cut in the building, substation accident, the patient suddenly spoke. The text, which the nurse on duty managed to record, contained incoherent but frighteningly precise references. The camera doesn't work. Stood there, didn't move. Silent, but there was noise. The film burned, but the frame stayed. The snow is dark, the inside is dark. Not day, not night. There's a sound behind me. You can't go back. He's there. Not alive, not a shadow. Eyes looking through the stone. The patient's name was later established through fingerprints. Gennady Valentinovich Silyutin. the second cameraman of the film crew that disappeared in September of the 66th. According to all documents, he was considered missing. His age and appearance matched. Doctors concluded post-traumatic catatonia with signs of deep depersonalization. There was no talk of transfer to Moscow. He was left in an isolation center until the end of the year, and then the trail was lost. There is unconfirmed information that in '73 he was taken to Kazan, where he soon died. Officially, he died of kidney failure. Silyutin's appearance triggered a new wave of internal interest in the case. Old papers were brought up in the VGIK archive. From the tapes found in the expedition archive, one unopened bobbin magazine was recovered. It read, "Camera B, Take 12, a 2-day plateau, static." When playing back in a room without light, at high scrolling speed, a strange effect is visually recorded, frame by frame, between landscape plans, as if an additional shadow fits in. There is no extraneous. The film was shot in an open space. But the angle of light refraction in the lens in one of the takes starts to change without camera movement. For a second, an almost elusive figure in the center of the frame. Human, alone, standing, no facial detail. Then, it's empty. The analysis carried out at the Defense Ministry's Optical Correction Laboratory showed that the damage to the film was not mechanical. Moreover, according to the memo, formally, stabilization is recorded on one frame where there is no movement of the medium, but an internal variable shadow is recorded, which has no physical cause. The light is not re-reflected from the snow, but as if absorbed. The image resembles the after effect of filming a high-density shaded source. However, the shadow is not cast by the object. It is formed in the absence of a source. This became the last official study. Further, the work on the case was reclassified and transferred to the 2nd Special Department, and the materials were removed from open storage. In April of the same year, at an internal meeting, the chairman of Goskino gave a verbal order. All projects related to ethnographic filming in hard-to-reach areas of Siberia and Altai were suspended until special instructions were received. 3 planned expeditions fell under this decision at once. In the protocol, it is added by hand. Due to unfavorable geological conditions and possible precautions, residents of Yazevka village, the nearest to the pass, repeatedly reported night lights over the hills, strange sounds and silent aliens in sheep's clothing during the following year. The information was erased. However, a record of the investigation remained in the district police. On the night of the 22nd to 23rd August of '67, 3 local men, returning from hunting, saw a figure standing motionless on the top of the plateau. Human, but too tall, without a cap. The light from the lantern fell inside, not reflected. One of them, Nikolai Litkin, died of a heart attack 24 hours later. The second fell into a coma. The third ran away, missing. The protocol remained in the police department under the "Do Not Disclose" label. At the end of the 67th year, the territory around the plateau was formally included in the border sanitary zone and closed to civilian traffic. In the geodetic map of the Ministry of Defense, the cipher Site X30 appeared. Behind the perimeter, according to unconfirmed reports, magnetic radiation recorders were installed. One of the employees, who later emigrated, recalled, "There is not just a magnetic field failure there. Someone or something is generating it there. It's not a natural phenomenon. It repeats itself too precisely, once every 6 days, exactly at midnight, like a mechanism." Finally, in an archive that was partially declassified decades later, a final letter attributed to a photogrammetric engineer involved in deciphering that single frame survives. "We haven't found an explanation. It can't be human, but it can't not be. There's something there. Not an image, not a glitch. It's standing, just standing there. But everyone who looks into that frame sees themselves. At first, it seems like a mistake. Then it's impossible not to believe it. The camera doesn't lie. It was him. He saw us before we even looked at him." In the 60s, disappearances in the Altai mountains were written off as climatic and geological causes. Official documents contain no mention of either Silutin or the film crew, but in the personal archives of Research Institute employees and in the diaries of old geologists, there are occasional notes. Pillar, shadow on the plateau, he is there, figure without a trace. What exactly did the film capture? Who or what stood in the frame before disappearing? And why exactly then, in the autumn of '66, did a whole group of professionals armed with equipment disappear without a trace, leaving only a fragment that no one could explain? There is no answer to these questions, but the shot remains, and he looks first.